If you are watching this, don't skip, because what happened that night is something that should never happen again. In this village, when a husband dies, the widow does not just mourn, she is put on trial. They say she must prove she did not kill him by drinking the water used to bathe his dead body.
Many women have gone through it in silence, in fear, in tears. But the day they tried it on one woman, the sky answered. What happened that night ended the ritual forever. Now the story. The title: A widow forced to drink cup's water. What happened next ended the rituals forever. The sun had barely risen over the quiet village, casting long golden streaks across the mud houses and palm trees. Smoke spilled from cooking fires, and the laughter of children echoed along the dusty paths. The village seemed peaceful at first glance, but beneath the ordinary life, old traditions ruled, often silently and harshly. Adaeze and her husband Chinedu lived in one of the mother's compounds near the main road. Chinedu, a skilled carpenter, spent his days carving wood and repairing furniture. Adaeze, gentle and hardworking, tended the home, cooking and caring for their two small children. Neighbors often stopped by. "Good morning, Adaeze," they would greet, and she would smile, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Life seemed ordinary, but as in every village, peace and joy could be fragile, and some customs could turn happiness into fear in a heartbeat. Now, the sudden illness. It began like any other week. Chinedu woke up feeling weak and complaining of body ache and fever. Adaeze gave him water, herbs, and even prayed fervently. But the illness worsened. By the third day, he could barely stand. Adaeze ran to neighbors and herbalists, pleading for help. The children clung to her legs, crying. By the fourth day, Chinedu lay still. His breathing stopped. Adaeze screamed and shook him, but it was too late. Her husband, the man he loved, was gone. Neighbors arrived, offering condolences. But behind the tears, whispering began to form like smoke, calling through the compound. Did she do something? Sometimes the wife knows more than she says. Fear struck Adaeze like a knife. She had never imagined suspicion would follow death. By midday, the village elders convened at the chief's compound. The ancestors demanded, the oldest elder said, his voice slow and deliberate. The widow must drink the cleansing water. Only then can her innocence be proven. A young man spoke up nervously. But she has two small children. She did nothing. This is cruel. The elders shook their heads. Tradition must be obeyed, they said. Our ancestors' ways are older than all of us. If we ignore them, misfortune will follow. Adaeze's younger brother arrived from a nearby town and read, "My sister is innocent. You can't force her to do this." The elders looked at him sharply. "Your voice is heard, but the ritual cannot be stopped." Fear and hopelessness settled over Adaeze. She returned home, her children clinging to her, unaware that the night would bring something the village would never forget. Now, preparation for the ritual. As the sun dipped below the horizon, villagers gathered quietly at Adaeze's compound. The body of Chinedu had been washed with special herbs, wrapped in white clothes, and laid on a mat. The calabash boiled had the water used to bathe him, placed carefully on a carved wooden stool. The four elders responsible for enforcing the ritual, 2 men and 2 women, stood solemnly, watching every move. The ritual now begins. The chief slowly raised his staff, his voice firm and unquestionable. Adaeze, stand, drink the water. If you are innocent, nothing will harm you. A heavy silence fell over the compound. Adaeze's legs felt weak as she struggled to stand. Her children clung tightly to her wrapper, their small voices trembling. Mama, don't cry. Her hands shook as the calabash was placed into them. The liquid inside moved slightly, reflecting the dim firelight. Around her, the villagers stood frozen. Some turned their faces away, unable to watch. Others leaned forward, caught between fear and curiosity. Adaeze slowly lifted the calabash towards her lips. Just as the edge of the bowl touched her mouth, a violent crack of thunder tore through the sky. Men screamed and covered their ears. At that exact moment, a sharp force struck the calabash in Adaeze's hand. The calabash split into 2 pieces and fell to the ground, the water splashing across the earth. For a brief second, everything stood still. Even the wind seemed to pause. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some stepped back in fear, but the 4 others exchanged quick, uneasy glances. One of the elderly women spoke sharply, trying to steady her voice. It is nothing, a mere coincidence. Another elder quickly stepped forward. Bring another calabash. Without delay, a fresh calabash was brought. The elders bent down and gathered the remaining water, scooping it carefully into the new barrel, as if determined to prove that nothing could interrupt the ritual. They rose again and placed it back into Adaeze's trembling hands. Drink, one of them insisted, his voice firmer now, almost defiant. If you are innocent, nothing will happen. Fear was no longer hidden. It was now visible in the eyes of the villagers. The sky above had grown darker. The air felt heavy, unnatural. Adaeze hesitated. Her breathing became uneven. Slowly, she lifted the calabash again, and just as she was about to drink, a violent roaring wind swept into the compound, spinning dust, leaves, and ash into the air. The fire flickered wildly. Children screamed. Women fell to their knees. Before anyone could react, the 4 elders were suddenly lifted off the ground. Their bodies rose into the air, twisting helplessly as the wind carried them like dry leaves. The villagers shouted in terror. Some ran, some froze. No one could understand what they were seeing. The wind carried the elders far beyond the compound, far beyond the watching crowd, until they disappeared into the distance. A moment later, they were dropped at the village burial ground. And just like that, the wind stopped. For several long seconds, after the wind stopped, no one moved. The compound, once filled with murmurs and tension, fell into a silence so deep it felt unnatural. Adaeze stood frozen, still holding the second calabash. Her hands were shaking, but she did not lift it again. No one told her to. No one dared. The child began to cry softly. Then another. The sound broke the silence, and suddenly panic spread. Some women dropped to their knees, whispering prayers. Others grabbed their children and hurried out of the compound without looking back. Men who once stood boldly now stepped away slowly, their faces pale, their confidence gone. Adaeze's brother walked towards her carefully, as if afraid that any sudden movement might awaken something unseen. He gently took the calabash from her hands and placed it on the ground. "It is over," he said quietly. But even he was not sure. That night, no one slept peacefully in that village. Doors were shut tightly. Fires burned longer than usual. Every sound, the wind, the rustling of leaves, the distant cry of night birds, felt like a warning. And one question sat heavily in everyone's heart. What have we been doing all these years? At dawn, word began to spread. The 4 elders had been found at the village burial ground, not injured, but shaken, very shaken. They were brought back, supported by younger men. Their faces were no longer proud or commanding. They looked like people who had seen something they could not explain, something they could not deny. They spoke little, but the fear in their eyes said everything. By mid-morning, the town crier moved through the village, his voice echoing, "Everyone shall gather at Chinedu's compound. The chief has spoken." No one ignored the call. Men, women, and even older children gathered, forming a wide circle. The chief sat quietly for a long moment before speaking. "What happened last night?" he began slowly. "We all witnessed it." He turned his gaze towards the 4 elders. "Speak!" One of them stepped forward. His voice was strong, now carried a tremor. "We were not in control," he said. "The wind carried us, not like ordinary wind. It was as if something unseen held us." Another added, "We were dropped at the burial ground, and for a moment, none of us could stand." A low murmur spread through the crowd. No one laughed, no one doubted. The chief stood up slowly, deliberately. "For generations," he said, "we have called this ritual justice." He paused, looking around at the faces before him. "But what we saw last night was not approval. It was a warning." The words settled deeply into the heart of the people. The chief lifted his staff slightly. "From this day forward, No widow in this village will ever be forced to drink such water again. A long breath seemed to pass through the crowd. Relief, fear, agreement. No one objected, because deep down, everyone knew the truth. That night had changed something. Not just the ritual, but the mind of the people. Chinedu was buried quietly. No ritual, no accusation, no humiliation. Adaeze stood beside the grave, holding her 2 children close. Tears flowed freely, but there was something else in her eyes now. Relief, not happiness, not peace, but relief that her suffering had not been completed. In the days that followed, something unusual happened in that village. People spoke less. They thought more. Women who had once lived in silent fear began to breathe a little easier. And the elders never spoke of the ritual again. Some traditions are not broken by argument, not by education, not even by time. Sometimes they are broken by a moment so powerful that no one can ignore it. That night in that village, something happened that forced everyone to confront the truth. That fear can no longer be called justice. That cruelty can no longer be hidden behind tradition. And that a life, no matter how small, should never be used to prove innocence. Adaeze did not fight. She did not argue. She did not protest loudly. But her moment of helplessness became the moment that changed everything. And from that day forward, the ritual ended. Not because people suddenly became wiser, but because they finally became afraid of being wrong. And here we draw the curtain. Thank you for spending your time with us. May we always choose what is right. God bless you. And please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.